Hey everyone, it's me again. Webcam shtick didn't really work, so let's give this a try. Anyway, Riot has announced the next big reworks for their Juggernaut characters. Those are Darius, Garen, Mordekaiser, and Skarner, and has since put them up on the PvE for playtesting. And while patch 5.15 was pretty small, patch 5.16 is going to be quite the opposite, with all the reworks and item tweaks and whatnot, creating a wall of text that rivals China. It's an awful lot to digest, so I'm here to break it down into more bite-sized, in-depth chunks for you to enjoy. As you can see here, I've got a button for you to skip to each part that you want to go to, or you can just sit down, get a sandwich, and enjoy the whole show. Anyway, what I'm going to do first is go over each part of the character's kit and the actual specific changes that are going to happen to it. Then I'll explain what those changes actually mean to the character, and finally what all these combined changes mean for the playstyle of the character as a whole, and what they will ultimately become after rework goes live, or at least what Riot wants them to become. Got it? Let's get started. Alright, first on the list is the man with some dunk in his trunk, Darius. Let's start off with the changes to his base stats. Darius' natural health, armor, attack range, and attack damage are all going up, especially his attack damage. As this is a common theme to all the Juggernaut reworks, Darius now has a whopping 5 AD per level. To put that in perspective, the current highest base AD in the game is Skarner, who maxes out at 130 AD at level 18. Darius at level 18 will be getting 146 AD. That's a lot. However, in exchange for that, his attack speed is taking a huge hit, with his base value and growth for level getting, well, the axe. Thank you. So basically, he'll be tankier and hit much harder, but also much slower, which makes sense for a guy wielding a ginormous-sized axe and wearing as much heavy metal as an 80s record store. Darius' passive, Hemorrhage, is getting some major changes. The bad news is that the base damage of his bleed has been noticeably nerfed by roughly a quarter, and has been changed to physical damage from magic, meaning that Darius is now much easier to counter-build in lane, since he can no longer sneak around your armor stacking with his magical bleed. His passive is also dropping the movement speed buff for nearby bleeding enemies, making him even more kiteable than he already was. That's a lot of bad news, sure. But the good news is that he is gaining an entirely new effect where if he successfully dunks someone or gets 5 stacks of Hemorrhage, he gains a new buff that gives him... I'm sorry, how much AD? Yeah, hold on. I have to make a call. Yeah, Riot. There's a typo on the rework page. Right here. It says. What do you mean it's not a typo? What do you? That's legally insane. Oh, fuck you, Merlo. Anyway, once you activate this new Super Saiyan Blood Rage mode, Darius gains an absolutely jaw-droppingly absurd amount of bonus attack damage, and applies full passive stacks to any enemy he hits. This is by far and away the biggest AD buff in the entire game. To be clear, an ADC at full build usually has about 200 bonus AD if they built Bloodthirster, and Darius now gets that completely free. Just... ugh. As for Darius' Q, there's actually a lot of changes to it, the most important of which is that it's not instant anymore. There's a 0.75 second delay on it, during which you can still move, but also during which is a big red ring of death around you that I'm pretty sure your enemies can see. This means it's going to be a lot harder to land correctly. The scaling has also been changed to scale off of your total AD rather than just your bonus AD, which is also a common theme in the Juggernaut reworks. At the current numbers, when you hit level 9 and have his Q maxed, you need to have built at least 50 bonus attack damage for his new Q to do the same damage with the blade as his old Q did with no AD at all. So for the early game, you're going to be doing a bit less damage than you did before, but mid and late game, you have the capacity to scale much harder than before. Plus, they added a totally new feature to his Q, where if you hit a player with the blade, you now heal yourself for a proportion of your missing health, which can proc on up to 3 people. Obviously, a very nice buff to your sustain. However, if you hit with the handle, not only do you do almost no damage at all, but you also do not get any hemorrhage stacks. These changes are going to make it much clearer the difference between the good and bad Dariuses. Your Q is now noticeably harder to land, and gives you virtually nothing if you miss. But the rewards for landing it properly are huge, with buttloads of damage past mid-game, and a self-heal. Now his W, Crippling Strike, is overall getting nerfed. The slow strength is, yes, going up very much, a whopping 90% all the time. However, the slow duration is getting cut in half to just 1 second. The cooldown reduction per hemorrhage stack is being removed, as is the attack speed reduction, but the base cooldown is going down significantly. So early game, before you've put any points into it, you're not going to be able to use it as often. Also, the damage of it is just getting nerfed really hard. So you're going to be doing a lot less damage with it, not going to get as much CC from it, and you're also not going to be able to use it as often early game. Alright, then we have Darius' biggest playmaking tool, his E. Now, yes, they are fixing that bug where it grabs people it wasn't supposed to grab, so good for that. They are giving it a very tiny range reduction, which I believe is just to make it so that when you're against a ranged unit, that you can't just automatically grab them as soon as they step into auto attack range. They are also adding a powerful but very brief slow when you do manage to grab somebody. So that, combined with the strong but brief slow on his W, means that his pick potential just went way up, because after you grab somebody, you can all but root them for a second or two. Kind of like how Blitzcrank grabs somebody and then knocks them up. So while his pick potential went way up, his ability to stick on someone and stay on them long enough to get his passive procced is going to go way down. Last but not least, we have Darius' R, Dunk. The base damage is going down, which sounds annoying, but remember the gigantic buff you get from your passive means that means virtually nothing. They're also taking off the mana refund, but just making it so that any successive dunks after the first just don't cost anything. They're also adding that at rank 3, it never costs anything ever. It's just, his ult is just completely free to use, which is honestly really stupid, because we just went through this exact thing with Echo. Like, how many players bitched and complained that Echo's ult costs no mana, and that even when he was totally he still had access to a massively powerful move, and then they fixed it, and now they're going to go and do literally the exact same thing again. Now, that aside, all in all, the new Darius is going to be a much different beast than the old one, and honestly, I think the new Darius is going to become the single biggest pub stomp character in the entire game, like even more than Katarina, I would say. Now, his ability to function in lane will be noticeably nerfed, because, especially if you build pure tank on him, because the base damage on his passive is going down, he's easier to counter build, his Q is harder to land and does less damage until at least mid-game, his W does less damage, so you are really forced to land your Qs properly just to get anything out of him at all before he hits level 6. Now, once he hits level 6, though, the ridiculous power spike he gets between his passive and his ult is absolutely insane. He gets an astronomical amount of damage even when building 100% tank. And while in lane he can still be counterpicked and can still be bullied out by characters who have more range than him or are more mobile than him, I think the real terror of new Darius is going to be team fights. Because while in lane it's hard for him to get to his god mode because he has less sticking power, his attack speed is a lot lower, the handle doesn't give him stacks anymore. In team fights, that changes. He can have his teammates hold someone down for him, he can just stick to an immobile tank, he can just finish someone off who is already low, and as soon as he gets his passive procced once, as soon as he gets that once, he can immediately start two-shotting anyone on the enemy team as much as he wants. He can just sit there and hop, pentakill the entire enemy team just because he managed to catch one person. And that is an amount of power that I really think is going to be deemed ridiculously overpowered in the game very soon after he comes out. Because not only will his ult not cost any mana, so he doesn't have to worry about running out of mana, but he can build pure tank and get all that damage, even with no damage built whatsoever. His ult can do 900 true damage with no damage built whatsoever. So imagine a full tank, or even just like one damage item Darius, being in a team fight, being that hard to kill that he's built all or near all pure tank, and yet still be able to do 1,000 true damage or more with his ult just because he managed to catch one person on your team. And honestly, I think that it's going to be too much. It's going to be too much because the team fight is going to revolve entirely around what can be done with Darius. I mean, if your team doesn't have the Darius, you have to spend a ridiculous amount of effort just making sure Darius doesn't get his hands on anyone. Or if you are on the team with the Darius, your team can practically just revolve around handing people to Darius for him to start his true damage rampage. I mean, yeah, maybe in really high-level play, you can play around it when people are gods at kiting, but up until that point, I really think when Darius comes out, he's going to be deemed outrageously overpowered. Maybe not in lane, but as soon as he becomes difficult to kill and gets a few items to help him out with his problems, all he has to do is get his hands on one person, and he is almost instantly granted a pentakill towards anyone who's remotely near him. He can just execute anything in his sight. Now, with that being said, don't get me wrong. I'm not against the new Darius. In fact, I actually like this idea. I like these mechanics. But I think that at their current values on the PvE, that the numbers are just too high. Like, either the attack damage buff needs to not be that huge, or it needs to take more than 5 passive stacks in order to get to that buff. Because as it stands, it's just too easy. It's just too easy for Darius to become a pentakill machine, because all he has to do is catch somebody. It literally doesn't even matter who he catches. It just has to be someone, and he will dominate the entire team fight. And if a Darius gets fed, you're just done. Just quit. If a new Darius gets fed, there's nothing your team can do against him. So, like, I like the idea, but I strongly believe that if he comes out as he is now, that there will be lots and lots and lots of please write out nerf OP crying in the forums until the next patch happens. So just be warned. Alright, next on the rework list is everyone's favorite Beyblade, Garen. And admittedly, Garen's rework is nowhere near as extensive or complicated as the other characters are. They basically just gave his ult a new effect, and then allocated power from the rest of his abilities in order to make up for that. Although his rework does not explain why he has such an incredibly tiny head compared to the rest of his body, so I'm just going to have to keep wondering that. Now, as far as Garen's base stats go, his attack damage, armor, and attack range are all going up, similar to Darius. His health, however, is going a little bit down. Other than that, nothing too fantastic going on here, and his passive is being completely untouched, so on to his Q. Now, Decisive Strike is just plain getting nerfed. It is gaining a tiny little dash on it, similar to the way Udyr's Bear Stun will work, so when you do hit your Q, your next attack will have a range of 225, which is nice, but the move speed duration is also going down by a second, and the dash doesn't even make up for that. Also, much more importantly, the silence duration doesn't go up with level at all. It's just 1.5 seconds all the time. It never increases. And that is going to be something Garen players are going to complain about a lot, because that's going to make his laning worse, that's going to make his team fighting worse, and his Q is just getting nerfed. Garen's W is also getting, well, a big chunk taken out of it. They're removing the % armor and magic resist buff, and what they're doing is they're reverting it back to the way it used to work a long time ago, where you get a small, gradually stacking flat armor and magic resist buff. Now, you will eventually hit the cap of 30 and get roughly the same buff that you got before, but it's going to take you longer into the game because it's based off how much stuff you kill rather than what items you bought. You're going to have to kill, right now, 120 things in order to get that cap, so it's going to take you a bit. They are also completely removing the tenacity from it, and that is much, much more important, because as a melee character, you really, really need to not get CC'd, and now that there's no tenacity on your W anymore, you are pigeonholed into buying Mercury Treads much more often, since you can no longer get a different kind of defensive boot, or even movement boots, and then rely on your W to get you through the CC swarms. Now you have to get Merc Treads almost always. Alright, next up is Garen's Spin to Win, his E, and there's actually a few things to talk about here. Thankfully, though, I do not have to talk about the 20% self-slow they gave him while he was damaging anything with his spin, which I don't even know why on the flying pig winning the frozen hell Iditarod, they decided to put that in, but thankfully it only lasted for 1 day before they were raged into undoing that. So anyway, the base damage and the ratio are both going way down. I know that is going to make a lot of Garen players cringe and clench their butts over, but hold on, it might be worth it. The cooldown is going down significantly, so while your spins may not be as powerful, you can spin more often. Also, they added effect where they took out the slow when you're going through minions. However, if you're damaging more than one thing, you do 25% reduced damage. So if you're getting spinned on, running into your minions will still help you by mitigating some of the damage. The one real thing here to point out is that while the damage per tick is going down, as you level up as Garen, not as you put points into the skill, as you level up the character, the number of ticks Judgment does goes up. What that means is that while early on your spin will do less damage, once you get to mid-game, specifically level 10, the extra ticks from your spin will even out the reduction in damage per tick. So once you get to level 10, your spin starts doing the same damage as it did before. Then once you get to level 13 and level 16, your spin is now ticking 10 times in the same duration instead of 6. So late game, your spin actually starts doing more damage than it did before. And then we come to Garen's ult, and I know that a lot of you Garen players are probably not too happy right now. That so far you've heard a lot of things that I'm sure you don't like. But this is what it is all for. This is supposed to be the payoff for what happens to the rest of your abilities. Because here's what happens. You now have a new passive on your ultimate that says the enemy champion who has most recently got a kill is deemed the villain. Garen's basic attack and each tick of his spin deal 1% of the target's maximum health as bonus true damage against the villain. Plus, and here's the thing that Garen players have been wanting since Season 1, your ult against the villain does true damage. And that's really what the Garen rework comes down to, is just how valuable is this new passive. And there's a lot of things that can be said about it. Yes, the first knee-jerk reaction to that is that it sounds very fun, but way, way, way too situational, arguably way too situational to really be that useful, and that the Garen rework really just plain isn't that good. But perhaps that's not true. Let's look at it a different way. Because yes, during lane phase, it's not particularly useful unless you're losing to your opponent, in which case it does help you get back into the game if you're behind, so that's good. But the thing is, when you're in a big team fight late game, somebody on the enemy team will always be the villain. And more often than not, that person is going to be the enemy mid or the enemy carry, aka the people that your team really, really, really wants dead. So while yes, this new Garen does lose a big portion of his early game lane bullying ability, which a lot of Garen players probably won't like because it's a big part of what Garen does, I think that they will enjoy finding this new identity as a late game carry killer, specifically once they hit level 16 and get their rank 3 ultimate. And this point is especially important for them, because once you have your maximum power democitizer, you can start killing targets when they are even remotely scathed. If the villain has 2,000 max health, and they are at exactly half, and you ult them, they will live by the aggressive fart's worth of damage that is 75 HP, meaning that your ult will smite them the instant they reach anything below half health, meaning that you can start Garenating squishy villies when they are at like 60 to 70% HP with just your Q and your ult. Like you barely even need your spin. Even a tanky character can be brought to like half, ignited and ulted, and now they're waiting for a respawn timer. This makes the new Garen fill a particularly unique niche as a specifically anti-snowball / anti-reset pick. Because think about it. The second that Katarina or Akali or even Darius starts their reset frenzy, you can immediately just push R and hit him on the nose with your newspaper of justice and be like, no, bad cat, bad. And while maybe his early game was hit a bit too hard, I think a lot of Garen players will grow to like that new identity. I just hope you don't get screwed over by like the support getting a kill in the middle of a team fight so now you can't execute the Yi or something like that. That would suck. Anyway, third in line to rework town is Mordekaiser, and this is where things start getting weird. Now, I am very glad that Mordekaiser is on this list because I used to like playing him a lot in Season 1 and 2, and he has not been seen or heard from since. So, while Dear Mr. Mord did in fact need a rework very badly, did he need this rework? So let's start with the basics. Now, while Mordekaiser's abilities are getting a sexy visual upgrade, his base stats are mostly getting chunked. Yes, his attack damage and attack range are both going up. He'll have the same attack damage as Darius, and his attack range goes up to the very nice 200, meaning that he will be the only character in the game with that attack range, save for Riven when her ult is on. But pretty much everything else, his attack speed, his armor, his health regen, are all going down, and making him irritatingly squishier, which is unlike all the rest of the Juggernaut reworks. And then on top of that, the already highly immobile Mordekaiser is getting his move speed reduced even further from 340 down to 325, which is like 3 or 4% after boots, which that, I believe, is much more unnecessary than the other changes. So, nah. Now, Mordekaiser's passive, Iron Man, which is the core of what Mordekaiser is getting some significant changes. First of all, the good news, the shield no longer decays on its own below a quarter of its maximum value, so you don't have to worry about completely running out of shield when you're out of combat for a while. The shield decay has also been changed to 2% of your base health from 3% of the maximum shield value. So your shield will decay slower, and your shield will not go below a quarter on its own. However, in exchange for that, your shield generation from your ability damage is going down significantly. So while you keep your shield longer, you also have a harder time getting the shield in the first place. Now, the other thing that's happening to Mord's passive is that the maximum shield is being changed to 25% of your maximum health. So it's just a quarter of whatever your max health is, rather than scaling solely off your level. And what this means is that if you do not build health, you will have actually a much smaller shield than you did before. It starts the same about level 1, but every level up, if you don't build any health, you are losing a bigger and bigger chunk of how much shield you have now versus how much shield you used to get. And when you're at like level 9 and up, you are losing about a quarter of your shield value, which is a lot of shield you're not getting. Now, obviously, because it scales off your maximum health, you can build health items and have the same and even more shield than you did before. But just to hit the same amount of shield you had before, you have to build 600 bonus health. Now, granted, yes, the Rylai's Liandry's combo does work very well on Mordekaiser, and that gives you 700 health right there, so it's not like it's difficult to hit that value. But the point of this is that they want Mordekaiser to be more DPS, less insta-burst, less insta-kill, and this will basically force you into building health. Even if you didn't normally do that, this will basically force you into building health and building a tankier, more DPS Mord, which I am totally fine with that. Except for the part where it limits your choices for what you can buy early on, because you basically have to get health early, so your first 1 or 2 items have to have HP on them. Otherwise, whatever choice you make, you are directly sacrificing your ability to have shield, and thus your ability to be Mordekaiser. So that is the part that bugs me. Now, when it comes to Mordekaiser's Q, they're actually doing something pretty cool. I actually like this. The way it works now is like there's no more splash damage, and yes, that is annoying that it doesn't target multiple things anymore, but what it is now is an astoundingly powerful sustained damage skill on a single target, because what happens is you hit your Q, and your next 3 auto attacks do continually more and more damage, with each attack dealing 3 times the bonus damage of the last. So when you first start off, the bonus is very small, but as you keep hitting them, the bonus gets bigger and bigger, and when you add up the damage of all 3 attacks, it is actually a pants-crappingly powerful sustained damage skill. With some look at that. Look at those freaking numbers. Look at those ridiculous numbers. 390% of your total AD, 260% of your ability power, and 260 base on a 4-second base cooldown. What that means is that as soon as you hit mid-game, there is basically no time when you are not using this ability. You can use this on practically, if not every single auto attack you swing. So yeah, that is hands down one of the strongest DPS skills in the entire game. And it also helps solve the big issue Riot had with Mordekaiser, where they want him to be a bruiser. They want him to be sustained damage and tankiness, not, insta-burst. And this, you still do a crap ton of damage, but you have to take a couple seconds to do it, and it's over several auto attacks. So this does solve a lot of the identity problems that Mordekaiser was having. So I am personally all for this ability change. So then we have Mordekaiser's W, and for the most part, I actually like the change to this move too. I mean, yes, it is getting a more emo name, but fine, whatever. The way it works now is you put it on an ally, and you still get that nifty little magnet effect where you get more move speed while you're moving towards each other, which I have wanted for a very long time for Mordekaiser's W to have movement on it. So that does help him be slightly less cripplingly immobile, but the way it works now is it doesn't do anything initially. You throw it on somebody, and then when you come close enough to them, the cloud of shards appears that will deal damage per second around the two of you. And unlike pretty much every single other AoE damage ability in the game, these ones do stack with each other, which is really, really nice, because that means if you can lock an enemy down, then you and your teammate can basically just cuddle them to death. Basically just nuzzle right up to them and just cuddle them until they can't even take it anymore and they have to go, I don't know, jazzercise or something. And on top of that, they're also adding this nifty little secondary effect to Mord's W, or once you have it on somebody and it's going and dealing damage, you can hit the button again to detonate it and end it early and deal an extra burst of magic damage around the two of you, and also heal you and your teammate based on how many enemies you hit. So you can actually use this at the very end of the duration to deal extra magic damage sprinkled on top, and also give you and your teammate in a team fight a pretty substantial heal. Plus, they also made it not cost any health. They also increased the range and lowered the cooldown by a lot. And this I actually really like. I actually really like the changes they've made to Mord. They even made it a little bit harder to use the admittedly very button-mashing Mord by making you have to time that. So yeah, that actually sounds really good. And wait, what's that? What is that? What the hell is that? And this is where the weirdness starts. Because what the hell that is a new passive that says, even with teammates present, Mordekaiser will always gain full experience from the minions he kills. So what that means is that Riot is trying very hard to pigeonhole Mordekaiser into this really awkward position where you have Mordekaiser instead of an ADC. And while my visceral seething hatred of ADC players will never be masked, and I would gladly, if it were viable, have a Mordekaiser on my team instead of an ADC, the fact remains that it's really, really awkward. Like, this Marksmakaiser thing is a huge gamble for the character, because it has to work. It has to be good. Not just good, I guess. Not just, well, it's okay. It has to be really good. Otherwise, if it's not viable, Riot has essentially just deleted the character. Because what this passive comes with is the staggering inability for Mordekaiser to be in a solo lane. Like, at all. Because what I found out a few days after first reading this is that this new W cannot be casted on yourself. it can only be cast on the other 4 members of your team. You can't even cast it on minions anymore, which, first of all, is just really, really stupid, because now if you try to take Mordekaiser into a solo lane, like top or mid, where you would normally see him, he is literally minus an entire ability just for trying to play that role. So now, if you want access to all 4 of your abilities, you must put him in bot lane. And that is where this just, what the hell are you doing, awkwardness is happening. And it's going to cause a lot of mixed feelings. And the thing that I've heard so far is that while some people hate it and some people are okay with it, so far from what the people in the PBE have been saying, it is very, very commonly believed that new Mord in bot lane is just not working. But this is part of the discussion that I will have to leave for the summary at the end, so we're going to put that on pause for now and go on with the rest of his kit. So, anyway, now we're on to Mord's E, which is getting significantly repurposed. While the AP ratio remains intact, the base damage is taking a massive dive, but is also gaining a total AD ratio to scale off of. This means that unless you build AD, the damage of your E is just plain going to be way less than before until late game, when your AD gets high enough to make up the difference from the base damage. In exchange for this loss in early and mid-game damage, it's getting a slight range and cooldown improvement, but much more importantly, it now gives you an additional 15% of your max shield for every enemy player you hit. What this results in is that while Mord's E used to be what you always maxed first on him, now it is actually what you want to max last, since leveling it up only gets you a measly 30 base damage and a quarter-second cooldown. That's it. That's all you get. And while it can eventually catch up to the power it had before, for the majority of the game, this new E is going to be mostly just a quick way to refill your shield, though it is very good at that. In a team fight, this skill should not be underestimated, since if you hit 3 people with it, you'll be gaining over 45% of your max shield back instantly on a 5-second base cooldown. That will lead to some insane baiting and tanking montages, I'm sure. But in the early laning phase, I can definitely see a lot of Mord players missing the impact that the move once had. Then, of course, we come to what is arguably one of the most broken ults in the entire game, the infamous 6v4 button, or as I like to call it, what that ADC deserved. Anywho, this move is being changed arguably the least of all of Mord's abilities, well, except for one very important thing. A Dragon Force reference! Seriously though, you can get a Dragon Ghost. And you don't even have to be the one who kills it. You just have to hit it within 10 seconds of your team getting it, and you get to march around the rift like a fucking boss. Or make Pokemon references, up to you. But while Mord's ult is getting some enticing buffs like the dragon thing, longer ghost duration, better stat buffs for the ghost since all it does is auto-attack you anyway, and the ghost can dance and BM with you, there is also one significant nerf, taking down its range by about a quarter. And while it may sound like all those other buffs are worth it, I gotta say that range nerf is probably gonna hurt a lot more than you think it will. As a Mord player, there were a great many times that I killed people with my ult when they were out of range of my other abilities because they got low and ran away. It also makes picking off low HP enemies who are out of position much harder, so that whole get an assassin to hand Mord a ghost thing is going to be noticeably more difficult to pull off. So, in the end, what this comes down to for Mordekaiser is that a lot of the tools he had before are being heavily repurposed. And while he has gained several very nifty new tools, the fact remains that a large portion of the way he used to work will be gone, especially in laning phase. Perhaps the biggest thing of note is that now that you max Q first and E last, is that Mord's inevitable push the lane like you're giving birth to it playstyle is not just weakened, but totally gone. Not only have his farming and wave clear plummeted until late game, but it is now harder to gain shield in the first place, and he is squishier to begin with, so while Riot seems to believe that the W passive guaranteeing him a level advantage will help him deal with the struggles of essentially counterpicking himself every time he goes into bot lane, playtesting so far seems to have proved otherwise. Because here's the thing about Mord. As the patch theme fittingly implies, he is much like the Juggernaut. By constantly using abilities and dealing damage, he essentially builds up more and more momentum and becomes harder and harder to stop. However, if you can stop his momentum, aka with crowd control, he becomes near useless, and as he can no longer build up the shield that lets him do his job. This new Mord, however, has so much trouble building up that momentum with his crappy farm and automatically having to deal with the poke and CC that counters him that he has an extremely difficult time just getting anywhere. On top of that, there remains the question, what kind of support do you put with new Mord? Do you have a hard engaged champ like Leona to try to hold his enemies down long enough that he can kill them, and thus have both of you be super weak to poke lanes? Or do you put him with a supporty support like Sona, who just nurses his crappy early game to try to keep him alive while he just farms? Either way, the plan with new Mord seems to be to just sit still and not really care about kills and just farm for 15 to 20 minutes, then hopefully get some items to let you bust out of the gate in mid-game with your level advantage and steamroll from there. But it's not just a support pick, you also practically have to have a strong early game jungler to help maintain dragon control, just so you can get your dragon ghost type Mega Charizard Q. Plus, since your team has no ADC, the rest of your team more or less has to be super pick/CC heavy just to enable Mord, lest he become useless. And really though, while I'm mostly okay with the Mord changes in themselves, it's this new weird-ass bot lane Mord that bothers me the most. Okay, the idea of Mord being in the marksman slot could shake up the meta, sure, but it should not, I repeat, not come at the cost of all the other roles he could fill. Like, his W, in my opinion, absolutely must be able to be cast on himself. It's downright stupid that it can't be, and that alone cripples his options. I mean, imagine what Mord could be with this rework. Imagine a Mord who is capable of trying to be ADC, sure, but can also still go top and mid like before. And hey, maybe with his W heal and the Dragon Ghost, maybe he could even jungle. Imagine the caution you would throw into the wind on the enemy team when they see Mordekaiser get picked in Champ Select, knowing that he can viably play 3 or 4 roles. Like, think of the power and identity Mordekaiser gains being that much of a wild card in ranked. Like, I would love that. Other Mordekaiser players would love that. And hell, pro players would be all over that like white penises in a racist internet forum. And if they can make only bot lane Mord work, then fine, that's good too, as long as it's effective. But I personally feel that it's like Riot is trying too damn hard to be unique with him, and it's stifling the potential he could actually have. But I guess we'll just have to wait and see. Alright, last but not least we have Skarner, and it's pretty hard not to feel bad for the guy. I mean, he had his heyday back in Season 2, but he has never again reached the same level of popularity or viability, despite the fact that Riot keeps reworking him over and over again. This is going to be rework number 3, so let's hope they got something right this time. Anyway, let's get this done. Okay, base stats. A little bit less HP, a little bit more attack damage. That's about it. On to his passive. And a wall of text. Okay, things are going to start getting weird again, because now just having Skarner in your game means that both teams have a batch of totally new objectives to fight over. Now, how this will work on other maps I have no idea, but on Summoner's Rift, having Scorponok here means that there will be 6 new spires sprinkled around the jungle at key areas, namely each red and blue buff, dragon, and baron. These points can be captured by either team, much like the Dominion points, and give a tiny amount of gold and a short vision buff when capped. The entire point of fighting over these points, though, is that when Skarner is nearby one that his team controls, he gains an enormous buff to his move speed, attack speed, and mana regen. And I mean huge huge. Like, as far as early and mid-game are concerned, if he's in the zone, you will never outduel him, outrun him without blinks, and he will never go And even late game, he can put up a damn good fight. Now, the idea behind this point cap mechanic is to make Skarner extremely powerful at jungle control and securing objectives. And while that is true in a best-case scenario, I think that, like Mord, this is another example of Riot just trying too hard to be unique and instead being counterproductive. Because the thing is, while the buff from these zones is colossal, it only exists in those zones, meaning take one step outside of the big glowing ring or just cap the point for yourself. And now Skarner goes from Goliath right back to David. So the big glaring weakness here is that this new passive, while strong, is painfully, cringingly situational. You don't get that buff when ganking, you don't get that buff when teamfighting anywhere with that tiny area of the map, and even when you are there, the enemy can just spend like 2 seconds taking the point to shut you down completely. This makes new Skarner even more of a feast or famine character than he already was, which is a problem that frankly should have been fixed, not made worse. Because now, if you're already ahead, you become completely untouchable with your massive jungle control. But if you're behind, you become damn near worthless, because now the enemy team can completely starve you of your passive with very little effort. Or in either situation, the enemy team can just force fights literally anywhere else but the jungle. Now, this does make Skarner a highly effective counterpick to farming junglers with weak early games like Master Yi, because now you can just bully the shit out of them early and delay their power spike all the way to next season. But against a ganking jungler like Shaco, they don't really give a crap, because they'll just kill your teammates instead of the wolves, thus making their teammates strong enough to keep you off of your points. So, I mean, I'm not really too thrilled about this new passive. I mean, maybe it's better than I'm expecting, but the counterplay is just too easy, in my opinion. I really think that this effect should have been reworked into something like Trundle's buff zone, since that would have been far less situational, but then again, we'll just have to see what the pros do with it. So next we have Skarner's second most iconic ability, his gruff, serious Q and its quirky partner, how much you spam it. And while I was kind of expecting Skarner's fame as the button mash bug to go away, it's arguably even more spammable than before. However, no matter how you slice it, it is less powerful for most of the game, since the base damage has been replaced by, you guessed it, a total AD ratio. So unless you build a noticeable amount of AD, it's going to be quite some time into the game before it matches its old strength. Now yes, the cooldown and mana cost are a lot lower, the CDR on hit is still there, but the stacking attack speed and more importantly move speed have been deleted. The point of all this is that his Q has been intentionally nerfed to prevent him from snowballing too hard, but the buff from his passive will make up for it with the attack speed itself and the ability to just be a literal walking fountain of Qs. But then again, outside of that Spire radius, you're going to see a significant drop in the effectiveness of this move. So, okay, that sounded pretty depressing for Skarner players, but I do have some good news about his W, which has really only had one big change, which is that the base value has been completely exchanged for scaling off a percentage of your maximum health. The AP ratio is intact. While this may sound scary at first, it's actually pretty nice. For one, it is very easy to have enough HP for this new shield to be bigger than the old one. In fact, you can do that with literally just your raw base stats, so building even a moderate amount of health will make your new W give you a much bigger shield than before. Plus, since the ratio goes up very little with level, it means that you now have the option of leveling your W last, meaning that if you're doing well or not against a particularly mobile team, you can max out your early and mid-game damage as much as possible and put points into defense last. Plus, it also means that building the newly buffed Rylai's on him became a much more tempting option, because it now gives him damage, a slow on his Q again, and a buttload of shield, which is actually 126 gallons. True fact, look it up, kids. Okay, so now on to Skarner's E, Fracture. And remember the stun from his old passive? Okay, this is where it went. So what happens now is that you hit someone with your E, and it still slows them, but now it marks them with the Crystal Venom debuff, causing your next auto attack against them to deal bonus physical damage and stun them for 1 second. Now, they also added a really awkward interaction with this where when you stun someone with your E or ult someone, the cooldown of your E goes down by the disable duration, and you also get your passive buff for the disable duration. Now, the good part of that passive buff is that it does give you a huge movement speed bonus when you grab someone with your ult and are dragging them around to help you drag them farther, which is great. But other than that, it really doesn't do diddly squat. Like, what are you going to do with a 1 second attack speed buff? Seriously. Now, the good news about the E in general, though, is that because of the cooldown reduction, you can hit someone with your E, stun them, ult them, and then pretty quickly stun them with your E again. So if you can land your E's, you can actually lock down someone for a fair amount of time. Plus, if you hit multiple people with your E, you can go and cycle through them and auto-attack them and stun each one of them, thereby lowering the cooldown of your E by a lot, kind of like how Udyr's Bear Stance goes. When you go into a team fight, you just cycle through targets and stun as many people as you can. And while I do like the physical damage portion of the move, I'm a little surprised it doesn't scale off anything at all. Like, it's totally flat damage you can't do anything about, which is weird. But anyway, overall, I really like the thought process behind these changes. I like what they're trying to do. It gives you quick access to a stun as long as you can land your skill shots, so there's no building up stacks, there's no virtually inescapable river of slows, and if you can consistently land your skill shots, you're still able to lock someone down pretty nicely. So all in all, I am a fan of these changes. I do like where they're going with Skarner's E. The only thing I would really add to it is that I think the passive buff duration should be longer than just the disable, because that's really odd to get like that weird little 1 second buff like that. I mean, they should at least make it where it includes the slow from your E, because think about it, you hit someone with your E, you get that slow, and then you are rewarded with the big move speed buff to catch them and get the stun. That would be pretty nifty. But again, let's wait and see what all the pro players and whatnot can do with a 1 second buff. Alright, last on the list is Skarner's most iconic ability, his Impale, and this move actually got changed way less than his other abilities, so I mean, it does less magic damage now, but it also does physical damage based off your AD, so they are going to great lengths to make Skarner a decidedly mixed damage champion, because he always had it on his Q, but now they also added it with his E and his R, so he is very much adopting the I do mixed damage identity, which is great, but there's not really much else to talk about, so yeah, okie doke. So when it comes to everyone's favorite bug and rock type, I'm honestly really not sure what to think about this rework as a whole. It's going to take some time and a lot of testing to figure out where and when picking him is appropriate and whether or not he is good enough at his job. And while there are some good parts to his rework, it's still being loomed over by that very glaring weakness of just how situational his power is. And that situationalness, which is not a word, makes him much less consistent, meaning he will probably never be an all-around good pick. And really, the core issue with this new Skarner is how many of his problems as a character just were not fixed. He is still very, very telegraphed in his attempts to use his ult. His meager gap-closing abilities are now even worse. He is still very all-or-nothing in his success, and he is still extremely reliant on items to cover his weaknesses and do his job. His new identity as an early jungle bully and his better access to a non-ult hard CC are definitely nice, but do those alone make up for his steep faults being even steeper? My gut tells me no, not once people get the hang of learning how to counter him. He can reach a crazy strong late game when in the jungle, but he's not a late game champion like Jax or Vayne who can do badly but hang on eventually to get their Mighty Morphin power spike. If he gets left behind, he's probably going to stay there. And honestly, of all the reworks, I think Skarner's is the one that professional play is going to determine the worth of more than anyone else. So, this is on you now, Meteos. Don't screw me on this. Anyway, that's the whole dang video. I hope you enjoyed it. I could have gone over the item changes too, but frankly, this damn thing's long enough as it is. So, enjoy your patch night. Hope you enjoy the reworks. In before Grave starts vaping, thank you and good night.